my friends, Brother Joey here once again. I pray you're all doing well. Just wanted to do a quick video here and update the recent developments that are rather alarming, as if the whole situation wasn't alarming enough over there at Fukushima. So I wanted to do a brief update on that whole situation, which is probably the greatest catastrophe in human history. And the radiation levels inside Japan's damaged Fukushima Daiichi nuclear reactor, specifically in the number 2 reactor, have soared in recent weeks. And I'm going to show you multiple reports on this. And apparently reaching a maximum of 530 sieverts per hour. And this is a number that experts have called unimaginable. And radiation is now, by far, the highest it has been since the reactor was struck by the earthquake and tsunami back in March of 2011. And scientists are struggling to explain what's going on. And I got all kinds of reports to get to that I'll link you up with in the description box below, of course. But my friends, certainly more signs of the times here as the radiation that this could cause affects the food chain, the ocean. We know that radiation covered the entire northern hemisphere. Show you a report on that in just a bit. And you know, you talk about the animal die-offs all along the West Coast. A lot of people attributing that to Fukushima, and I think rightly so. Of course, you know, you get into the scriptures that foretell economic collapse, famine, and food scarcity in the end times, and certainly events like this play a large role in that. And so let's get to some of these reports here, and starting with this first one, in which the headline reads, Obama hid huge crisis with Japan, and it's only now being revealed. And apparently, experts are claiming that there is basically 6 years to fix this thing or face grave danger. And a lot of people would probably argue that it is past the point of fixing. It's more about containing what's already been done. However, the piece goes on to say, and it references Dr. Chris Busby, and he said that the Fukushima disaster was the worst disaster in the history of mankind. And, you know, when he said that, he wasn't being an alarmist or otherwise, you know, over-exaggerating. He wasn't being a fear-monger. The disaster of March 11th, 2011 saw no less than 4 nuclear reactors either melt down. That's where toxic nuclear fuel turns molten and unapproachable by man or machine. And we seen the 4 nuclear reactors either melt down or melt through. And when they melt through, it's where the molten fuel drools out of the containment vessel, basically poisoning the land, and meltouts where the core of the reactor explodes out into the world, in this case as far away as Tokyo. We've seen all 3 instances. We've seen all 4 reactors, as this piece alludes to, either fully melt down, melt through, and then there were melt outs where, you know, there were explosions pushing the radiation out into the world. And of course, you know, I've reported extensively in many reports, and I remember even on my old channel back when it first happened back in 2011, probably from 2011 till 2014, I reported extensively and frequently on this whole thing. And you know, we've seen like the reports of the animals being affected, the foods being affected over there, people, massive increased cancer rates, not only over there in Japan, but across the Pacific Ocean, in many areas of North America, specifically the west coast of Canada and the United States. We've seen many of these reports, okay, and I've showed them to you and linked you up with them, and it shows the severity of this situation. And this piece here, it goes on to say, as I got pulled up on the screen for you, it says, some of the temperatures erroneously reached numbers hotter than the surface of the sun. something that still leaves a radiation so thick and poisonous that even robots cannot operate in the location that needs to be tended to and closed off. So robots can't even approach this when it was that hot of a temperature. And so it says here for 4.5 billion years. And that's a remarkable thing. It says mankind has no machine or a technology, nor any in the works, that address how to clean up and seal up the area. Fukushima just sits like a small neutron star on the coast of Japan, spewing radiation into the Pacific Ocean in the drinking water and the air. Wildlife like birds carry the radiation from the plant to the city on their wings, as do insects. They die and or get into the food supply and remain radioactive and deadly within people forever once inside their bodies. There is no known way to remove such small isotopes from the body. And, the piece goes on to talk about here how many life-ending thyroid cancers have developed and grown in both Japan and America since Fukushima. So another fact there, basically acknowledging what I mentioned previously about how it's affecting not only many areas over there in Japan, but across the Pacific Ocean. And as many of the experts will say, as we see in many of these other reports I'm about to show you, this thing is far from over, and the extent of it has... we haven't even seen the worst of it if we don't get this thing under control, which I don't know how it's going to happen, as we've seen alluded to in this piece here. There's no known technology to deal with this. And I mean, I've heard all kinds of things brought forth by scientists trying to find a way. I've heard building a rock dome over it. I've heard a titanium dome. I heard all kinds of different things. And so it remains to be seen what they're going to do, if anything can be done. And so, a lot of people like to play their video games and their zombie apocalypse games and watch their zombie shows. And I'll tell you right now, what you're seeing in these shows, could realistically become a reality. When you got multiple nuclear plants melting down, like what happened at Fukushima, all it takes is a couple natural disasters affecting nuclear plants in different areas of the world, and you're going to have fatal radiation levels affecting humanity. And that's certainly what we're seeing in many of the heaviest hit areas, as this piece alludes to here. And yet, sadly, after recent storms and many other factors over there, the radiation spewing out of the facility, the nuclear facility over there, is now worse than it has been at any time since the crisis first happened, as I said. And I mentioned that readings of 530 sieverts have been recorded, which in layman's terms is enough to kill a man over 100 times. And 1 sievert will sicken a man. Okay? 5 will kill half of all men in a month's time. And 10 will kill said man in a week. And the piece goes on to mention here that even a small safe dose will raise one's risk of cancer tenfold or more. There is no safe dosage of radiation. Which questions even, the piece goes on to say here that questions are even arising about cell phones, much less nuclear fuel, which is of a deadlier form and of course lifespan. And the report goes on to say here that even those readings are small compared to the over 2 trillion becquerels that were also recorded at the plant. with a becquerel being 1 microscopic nuclear explosion per second in the body, each single one being enough to mutate a cell to a cancer state. Okay, and this is alarming because TEPCO, which is not bringing full coverage of the matter, but TEPCO has found holes in pipes that suggest that the toxic fuel may have eaten through them once, or if it has already done so. The piece here goes on to say, the water supply for not only Japan, but much of the world will be forever tainted. This happened after the bomb testing in America, where the whole of human DNA was forever altered for the worse and made less unstable. And made less unstable. Fukushima is many, many, many times worse than any of these bomb tests ever done. Okay, and you can look up those facts for yourself and prove it to yourself, because this is a reality here. A sad, tragic reality, and certainly a sign of the times, my friends. And so let's get to a couple other reports here. And keep in mind, too, that I mentioned cancers in Japan and on the west coast of the United States, and even in some areas in Canada, have skyrocketed since the Fukushima disaster, particularly thyroid-based cancers among children. And keep in mind, too, that food that is too radioactive to be eaten in most of the world is actually shipped and fed to Americans thanks to Obama and what he has, some of the legislation and deals he's signed regarding that. But mushrooms, for instance, which soak up radiation like a sponge, milk, which deadly strontium-90 clings to like glue, and cheese have found to have been contaminated the most, apparently, according to this piece. To what degree is hard to tell, because Obama shut off the testing of food after the disaster, and at the behest of the bottom line. Obama also allowed the amount of radiation in food to reach levels that mimic the Mad Max movie and are so high that no other nation allows anything even close. And that is why it is okay to sell tuna and sushi with tumors on it for food consumption, which is just ridiculous. Absolutely every single tuna caught in the Pacific Ocean was found to have been irradiated, and since even one speck too small to see of such radionuclides can kill, is any amount safe? It poses that, it makes you ponder this question. And you're seeing, many, many deformities and mutations on a lot of the wildlife, particularly around the area. And, keep in mind that many experts and scientists have come out and called the situation over there at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear facility, they've called it a possible life extinction event on several occasions. This here is another piece I'll go ahead and link you guys up with from the Japan Times, talking about a lot of the things that I've mentioned already, but I want to link you up to this source. And it talks about how the highest radiation reading since the March 11th, 2011 disaster has been detected at the Fukushima number 1 reactor and also the area as a whole. But this piece specifically refers to that number one reactor, and talks about the 530 sieverts per hour, which is, again, the highest triple core meltdown, the highest since the triple core meltdown there in March of 2011. And in this report from globalresearch.ca, it's talking about how radiation levels inside the damaged reactor at Japan's Fukushima nuclear plant, it mentions, again, here we see in this report that it has hit a record high and are the worst since the plant suffered the meltdown nearly 6 years ago. And the latest readings now pose a serious challenge as officials prepare to dismantle the stricken facility, which I have no idea how they're going to do that if it's unfit for robots to even function. It goes on to say radiation levels inside the containment vessel of reactor number 2 at Fukushima has reached 530 sieverts per hour, a figure described by experts as unimaginable. The readings taken by TEPCO, or Tokyo Electric Power Company, were taken near the entrance of a space immediately below the pressure vessel, which contains the reactor core. The radiation level inside the plant now far exceeds the previous high of 73 sieverts per hour, which was recorded soon after the triple meltdown in March of 2011. TEPCO made the readings by analyzing electronic noise and caused by the radiation in video images, and the company says this technique has a margin of error of plus or minus 30%. So even at the extreme low ball, the levels are no lower than 370 sieverts per minute, but possibly even as high as 690 sieverts. And keep in mind, needless to say, this plant is not fit for human life, but remember, just one dose of a single sievert is enough to cause radiation sickness and nausea. Exposure to 4 to 5 sieverts would kill about half of those exposed to it within a month, while a single dose of 10 sieverts is enough to kill a person within weeks. And we're seeing these extreme levels of hundreds of sieverts, and very alarming. And of course, we see many reports coming out about the recent findings over there at Fukushima. Here's another one I'll link you up with, talking about how these record high radiation levels are actually very fatal, as I've mentioned. And so, again, another piece referencing this here. Meanwhile, it was reported just before those latest findings I've showed you were released. This is, I believe, this article here is from January 23rd. And it talks about how, according to experts, the U.S. was hit with sudden spikes of rare radioactive material from Fukushima, which has a 15.7 million year half-life. And the orders of magnitude rise in levels on the west coast over there in much higher amounts than were detected near the Fukushima plant just after 311 are being detected across the ocean. And so I'll link you up to this piece. E&E News covers it extensively. They always include multiple reports. Here's a report from the Royal Society of Chemistry on the severity of it and talking about some of the numbers when you hear, a half-life and some of that. But it says here, just to go over it briefly, the National Institute for Physics and Nuclear Engineering, Romania 2015 emphasis added, AMS analysis of 129 from the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear accident in the Pacific Ocean waters of the coast of La Jolla, San Diego, in the United States. This paper presents the results of an experimental study we performed by using the accelerator mass spectrometry method with iodine 129. And they've showed that there's a half-life of 15.7 million years, as I referenced, to determine the increase of the radionuclide content in the U.S. West Pacific Coast waters 2 years after the March 2011 Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant accident. The results of the experiments showed a significant increase of the radionuclide concentration during the late spring of 2013. I remember reporting on that. Compared to the isotopic ratio 129I to 127, and measured at a 40-kilometer distance offshore of Fukushima and immediately after the accident, our results show an increase on the U.S. West Coast that was more than 2.5 factor higher. Also compared with the pre-Fukushima background values in San Diego, our results show an isotopic ratio of about 2 orders of magnitude higher. So, I'm not going to get into the entire report. There's a lot of deep stuff there to give you all the numbers. I'll link you up to it. But it even gives you a link to the studies and some diagrams and what have you. But again, we see that even the U.S. being hit with spikes of rare radioactive, fatal radiation, and some of the levels detected in certain areas are higher than that were detected at the Fukushima plant just after the disaster occurred back in March of 2011. Another report here from E&E News or Energy News. This one's from February 1st, just a few days ago, about a week ago. And it says here, the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster has been the second most serious crisis of a nuclear power plant in human history. The release period lasted over 2 months, emitting a significant amount of radioiodine, radioxenon, and radiocesium, as well as other isotopes such as plutonium. And plutonium, one of the most dangerous things known to man. And it says here, besides the local to regional scale impacts of soil and water pollution, isotopes released into the atmosphere could be measured globally. In total, atmospheric release was estimated to be 14,000 to 15,300 pbq of radioxenon and 340 to 800 pbqs of other isotopes. The radioactive plume in the atmosphere moved towards the Pacific, reached North America in 5 days, and Europe in 8 days, according to scientific studies. And it says here, Fukushima-derived radioiodine and radiocesium could be identified in the entire northern hemisphere. And it gives you many of the states and readings here, and I'm not going to go through each and every one of them, but I'll link you up to the piece. But we see here that it continues to show that in the U.S., they're being hit with extremely large peaks of Fukushima radioactive material, as well as in Canada. And it's a significant amount of plutonium was released for months, and how this radioactivity from the Fukushima, the crippled Fukushima nuclear facility, measured globally and was found to have blanketed the entire northern hemisphere. And in this piece here, again, we see reference the term unimaginable that was used after seeing the readings by scientific experts performing the testing. And it talks about here in this piece that record high radiation levels were found at the Fukushima plant, and they also found a gaping hole underneath one of the containment vessels. And officials have come out and they've admitted that it's highly possible. In fact, other reports after have come out and stated that yes, fuel did leak through the containment vessel, and so there are massive concerns now, as this piece talks about further, over radioactive gas leaks. I mean, these are the terms being thrown around by experts doing the testing. They're saying these readings are unimaginable. We're seeing, like this piece here alludes to, unprecedented. As it says here, Fukushima reactor far worse than previously thought. Melted fuel has come in contact with underground water. Molten core appears spread over an extensive area. And Japan will have a much more difficult time decommissioning. And according to official, these findings recently are a very big turning point and questions are arising on whether or not this can be contained at all. As I previously mentioned and showed you in the previous report, there's no known technology on this planet to deal with this type of thing. And so I'll have to, God have mercy. And, you start to get the picture of why, you read when Jesus is speaking about the signs preceding his second coming, and then he says some of the times and says that there's a time coming upon the earth that is unlike any other time that ever was or ever will be, and except that time be shortened, no flesh would be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. Hallelujah. And you start seeing things like this, along with all the other things going on around the world, and you start to get the picture of what it means when Jesus said, except the time be shortened, that no flesh would be saved, because we'd probably destroy the entire planet, and ourselves, for that matter. But this piece here, reported on February the 3rd, talking about the situation, says, alert, collapse at Fukushima. And according to TV reports, it says here that officials found a large section under the reactor to be unstable and apparently about to collapse. It says here that, in a quote from one of the scientists doing the testing, that it is bad news, and it's time to reconsider that trip to the east coast of Japan. But again, we see alarming findings, and of course they link you up to all kinds of different reports here on the matter from multiple Japanese and news agencies and other news agencies from around the world. Of course, even with the video of the Japanese TV reports. So I'll link you up with that. But another report here stressing the urgency of the matter. And this is such a terrible tragedy that is affecting many still to this very second, and is probably far from over. One of the things that I've been following is in my Hosea 4:3 prophecy videos is the mass animal die-offs around the world, and we have been seeing massive die-offs along the west coast that many, as I said earlier, attribute to the Fukushima disaster. And in this piece here, which I'll link you up with, it contains multiple reports from different news agencies, but it says here, according to a TV reporter, and I quote, "Whoa, dead whales, record high number of deaths in Hawaii, and carcasses are scattered throughout the islands in the Pacific. Sick and starving animals apparently is a mystery to experts," and they're saying possible health effects from Fukushima radiation off the coast. So another piece there I'll link you up with, showing the impacts, the devastating, catastrophic impacts still ongoing from Fukushima. In fact, these new radiation levels recorded over there at Fukushima apparently dwarf the highest peaks of that at Chernobyl, which was the previously largest nuclear disaster prior to what happened over there in Fukushima. Goes on to say here that in this report that as noted a few days after the Japanese earthquake, that the amount of radioactive fuel at Fukushima dwarfs that at Chernobyl, and that the cesium fallout from Fukushima already rivaled Chernobyl. And we also noted previously that Fukushima radiation could end up on the west coast of North America, and of course that's precisely what happened on a massive scale. And it mentions here the next month, it was reported that TEPCO came out and they admitted that the radiation from Fukushima could exceed that from Chernobyl. They admitted that on their own. And so we see this is consistent with the facts here when we say that this is far worse than Chernobyl ever was. And Goes on to say that Fukushima's reactors had actually suffered something much worse than a total meltdown. Nuclear melt-throughs, where the nuclear fuel melted through the containment vessels and into the ground. A few months later, we reported that radiation will pollute the area around Chernobyl for 5 to 10 times longer than models predicted, between 180 and 320 years. The following year, it was reported and pointed out that the operator of the Fukushima plant admitted they couldn't find the melted fuel from the Fukushima reactor number 2, and that the technology doesn't yet even exist to clean up or let alone contain what's going on there at Fukushima. And the highest radiation levels ever measured at Chernobyl were 300 sieverts per hour, an incomprehensibly high dose which can kill a man pretty much instantly. But a radiation level much more than that was found at Fukushima, as we've seen, right? The 530 sieverts per hour were just measured over there at Fukushima's number 2 reactor. And this new record at Fukushima is 70% higher than that of Chernobyl's readings. And the highest previously measured at Fukushima was 73 sieverts per hour back in March of 2012. So we're seeing massive increases in the readings. And again, my friends, I'll link you up with all the articles in the description box below, but certainly crazy times that we live in. I just pray that you know the Lord, that you're right with God, that you've repented of your sins, you've been born again, spiritually speaking, by God's Holy Spirit through faith in Jesus Christ. And because at the end of the day, that's what matters. And, we're going to look back on these times and it's going to seem like, as the Bible says, a vapor in the wind that appears for a short time and then vanishes away, because when we're standing before eternity, which is timeless, we're going to realize how important the time that we lived on this earth really was to the eternal destination of our souls. So I pray that you've given your life to Jesus Christ and that you get into the Word of God and study it to show yourself approved and live it out. God bless you guys. The core of the reactor explodes out into the world, in this case as far away as Tokyo. We've seen all 3 instances. We've seen all 4 reactors, as this piece alludes to, either fully melt down, melt through, and then there were melt outs where there were explosions pushing the radiation out into the world. And of course, I've reported extensively in many reports, and I remember even on my old channel back when it first happened back in 2011, probably from 2011 till 2014, I reported extensively and frequently on this whole thing. And we've seen like the reports of the animals being affected, the foods being affected over there, people, massive increased cancer rates, not only over there in Japan, but across the Pacific Ocean, in many areas of North America. This is Dr. Chris Busby, and he said that the Fukushima disaster was the worst disaster in the history of mankind. And, when he said that, he wasn't being an alarmist or otherwise, over-exaggerating. He wasn't being a fear-monger. The disaster of March 11th, 2011 saw no less than 4 nuclear reactors either melt down, that's where toxic nuclear fuel turns molten and unapproachable by man or machine, and we seen the 4 nuclear reactors either melt down or melt through, and when they melt through, it's where the molten fuel drools out of the containment vessel, basically poisoning the land, and meltouts where the Greetings, my friends. Brother Joey here once again. I pray you're all doing well. just wanted to do a quick video here and update the recent developments that are rather alarming, as if the whole situation wasn't alarming enough over there at Fukushima. So I wanted to do a brief update on that whole situation, which is probably the greatest catastrophe in human history. And the radiation levels inside Japan's damaged Fukushima Daiichi nuclear reactor, specifically in the number 2 reactor, have soared in recent weeks. And I'm going to show you multiple reports on this. And apparently reaching a maximum, attributing that to Fukushima, and I think rightly so. Of course, you get into the scriptures that foretell economic collapse, famine, and food scarcity in the end times, and certainly events like this play a large role in that. And so let's get to some of these reports here, and starting with this first one, in which the headline reads, Obama hid huge crisis with Japan, and it's only now being revealed. And apparently, experts are claiming that there is basically 6 years to fix this thing or face grave danger. And a lot of people would probably argue that it is past the point of fixing. It's more about containing what's already been done. However, the piece goes on to say, and reference a maximum of 530 sieverts per hour. And this is a number that experts have called unimaginable. And radiation is now, by far, the highest it has been since the reactor was struck by the earthquake and tsunami back in March of 2011. And scientists are struggling to explain what's going on. And I got all kinds of reports to get to that I'll link you up with in the description box below, of course. But my friends, certainly more signs of the times here, as the radiation that this could cause affects the food chain, the ocean. We know that radiation covered the entire northern hemisphere. Show you a report on that in just a bit. And you talk about the animal die-offs all along the West Coast. A lot of people